The rain continued to fall for several days. Su Fanin liked to boil a pot of tea and sit at the table beside the window, writing and drawing. I, on the other hand, would lie on the sofa with a book in my hands. The puppy she gave me, which I named Pudding, would curl up at my feet, quiet and peaceful. During this time, our relationship grew significantly. Outside the window, the sound of rain pattered, while inside, the scratching of her pen on paper and the occasional turning of my book pages created a harmonious atmosphere. It strangely reminded me of the phrase, stable life in the present world, peaceful and good times. Suddenly, a series of rapid knocks broke the silence. Su Fanin's neighbor stood outside, his face filled with urgency. "Fanin, your dad just collapsed. You need to go back and see him." Su Fanin's hand faltered, her slender body trembled, and she immediately rushed out like a madwoman. I quickly followed. Uncle Su had always taken good care of us. When my grandmother was alive, he often helped us, and recently, he had been sending us homemade food every few days. He lay on the bed, his face pale with illness. Su Fanin frowned and asked, "Dad, how are you feeling? Do we need to go to the hospital?" Despite her efforts to suppress it, her voice trembled. Uncle Su glanced at me and let out a long sigh. "I didn't plan to tell you," he said, beckoning me forward. He fumbled under his pillow and pulled out a piece of paper, handing it to me. "I don't have much time left. My biggest concern is Fanin. Swayan, I know you're a good kid. I want to entrust her to you." On that piece of paper, it clearly stated, "Advanced cancer." Su Fanin snatched the paper and her brows furrowed deeper as she read the contents. She remained silent for a long time before finally saying, "It might be a misdiagnosis. We'll go for another checkup in a few days." Despite her words, Su Fanin became more and more withdrawn each day. When we were young, she would find me hiding and crying, and now, I was the one searching for her, hidden and sobbing. When she saw me, she lifted her head, her nose red and her eyes still misty. Seeing her in this state, my heart ached. "If you want to cry, just cry. You don't have to hold it in," I said, sitting beside her. I hesitated for a moment before slowly placing my hand on top of her head, gently rubbing her soft hair, just like she had comforted me when we were young. June was coming to an end, and perhaps it was due to my troubled feelings, but I felt that this summer was much hotter than usual. "I came back this time because my dad said he was sick," she said, looking up at the sky with a choked voice. "But when I got home, he brushed it off as a joke. I thought he was just fooling me too," she continued. I listened quietly. At this moment, she needed a listener more than a conversation partner. "Swayan, thank you for everything these past few days. Don't take what my dad said too seriously," she said. "You're not my responsibility, and you don't have to take care of me. You shouldn't sacrifice your own marriage for the sake of our friendship," she added. Uncle Su's final wish was that I would marry Su Fanin. I stared into the distance, silent for a long time. I couldn't quite put my finger on my feelings for Su Fanin during this time we spent together. Being with her was comfortable, even if we said or did nothing. Seeing her cry made my heart ache uncontrollably, and I wanted to find ways to make her happy. The idea of her becoming my burden didn't seem unpleasant. In fact, there was even a hint of anticipation. After a long silence, I heard myself say, "Fanin, let's get married." Before the age of 14, my parents were strangers who only appeared during holidays. After 14, they were family members who only asked if I had enough money. Did they love me? They probably did, but the emotional gap of 14 years made them unsure of how to be close to me. Every time I saw my mother interacting affectionately with my younger brother, who was 5 years my junior, I would comfort myself with this thought. When my mother heard the news of my marriage, she only asked about Su Fanin's background and then agreed. We set the wedding date for a month later. Su Fanin suggested a simple ceremony, but I refused. Although I couldn't give her a luxurious wedding, I wanted her to have everything that other brides had. Since I had decided to marry her, I wouldn't let her suffer any injustice because of me. After discussing the wedding arrangements, we returned home together. A blue Pagani Huayra was parked outside the small building. Zhao Siyu stepped out of the car, his chiseled face filled with fatigue. His dark circles were prominent, and even his jaw had sprouted short stubble. It seemed he had driven all night to get here. He frowned as he looked at Su Fanning beside me and asked in a deep voice, "Is she the one you're going to marry?" As brothers, I had only told him about my wedding plans. I nodded, and Zhao Siyu's expression darkened further. "Suiyan, let's talk," he said. Su Fanning, always considerate, left us some space. Zhao Siyu stared at her retreating figure and asked with a furrowed brow, "Have you made your decision?" I followed his gaze and unconsciously softened my voice as I replied, "Yes, I have."